What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Ian Cummings here with my good friend Derek Tate, fantasy football analyst, and we'll call him NFL draft analyst. I think he's earned it at this point. He's been doing a lot of great scouting reports. Yeah, he's like, yeah, let's go. I earned my stripes. We are here, and we've got, 3 episodes left before the NFL draft, Derek? We're right on the home stretch. It's April 3rd. The draft is somewhere in the 20s. I still don't have the exact date down. You think I'd remember it being an NFL draft analyst? I don't, but it's somewhere in that range. We're around 3 to 4 weeks out, and we're on the home stretch. So we're going to have a mailbag next week. We're going to have our big boards finalized on the 15th. So we'll be able to go through those ranking changes. Today, though, we have a really exciting episode. When I was with Dalton Miller a few months ago, and Dalton's a great guy, we talked about the QBs, I think in January, February, somewhere around there. We had a QB checkpoint episode after the year. We're going to have another one today. Final QB checkpoint, talking about these guys, ranking them, and we have some differences. So I'm really excited to get into it. But first off, Derek, my man, it's been a week, a long time. How you doing?
I'm all right. Like you said, sometimes it's a little tricky to remember exactly when the NFL draft is. It's kind of like that's the event we're all working towards, right? That's what we're doing all these.
That's the Super Bowl. You think we'd have it circled, like ingrained in the brain, but I couldn't tell you. I think it might be the 26th. I think, but
25th, April 25th, and then is round one. I always remember exactly when it is because it correlates perfectly with my dad's birthday. Mm-hmm. So every single season, we're doing something for the NFL draft, and he's bugging me about who he thinks the Bucs are going to take and who he thinks they should take. And then I try to give counterpoints, and it turns into a nice little 30-minute to 5-hour discussion about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But outside of that, always looking forward to the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's fun. It's great. And the lead up to it is exciting. It's a double-edged sword because you have a lot of information flying around this time of year, and most of all with the quarterbacks, right? There's so many varying opinions, and it's good to have varying opinions, but at the same time, there's a lot of discourse that doesn't get to the root of the issue. A lot of discourse is just like, oh, his stats were bad, right? Or, oh, Caleb Williams off the field, what does he bring to the table? Which, hey, it's good to cover all your bases and turn over every stone in the evaluation process, but you want to do it with a clear head and objective evaluation. And it's tough to sift through that. But today we're going to try and cover all our bases. We're going to try and get through the top 7 or 8 quarterbacks, but we're going to focus on that first 4 because right now it's very clear that there's probably 4 quarterbacks that go in the top 10, right? You're looking at Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels, and J.J. McCarthy. That's kind of the group. Michael Penix Jr. has had a great offseason, and I think he could sneak in round 1. Bo Nix has had some hype there as well. Spencer Rattler is a sleeper, right? But we're going to start with that top 4 group. Derek, I've never talked QBs with you before, and I'm excited because we went over the rankings a little bit, and we definitely have some differences. Talk to me just about your general takeaways watching this QB class in depth over the past few days.
I think it's a great class. I really believe that it's one that we're going to get multiple, starters for 5 to 8 years down the road. I think that there's legit 4 franchise caliber quarterbacks entering this draft class. Michael Penix Jr. being the one that's a little bit of a conversation and maybe a little bit more system dependent. But the 4 at the top of my board anyway, I truly believe all these guys have a very exciting ceiling, Pro Bowl type ceiling, and even with some guys like Drake Maye and Caleb Daniels or Caleb Williams, Caleb Daniels. Now we're combining games.
We know it's time to end the draft cycle when we're mixing those up, man. But hey, we talk about them every day, so it's natural. It's natural.
But there's a lot of exciting prospects. Obviously, whenever you're talking about quarterbacks, the landing spot, the infrastructure around them, whether it be the offensive line, the offensive scheme, play calling, and then obviously the skill position players on the outside and the backfield play such a huge role as to how much success and how easy that transition can be made from the college game to the pro game. But all these guys, in particular the top 4, I believe they can step in day number 1 and be an effective NFL starter in the right situation.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at too. Situation and landing spot plays such a big role, and it's tough to go back retrospectively, right? Because you look at these guys and like Zach Wilson, for example. Obviously, the Jets didn't do a great job supporting him, but at the same time, looking back, there are learning lessons to be had from that evaluation, things that were maybe overlooked or maybe projections that were made a little bit too hastily, right? So you're always a little bit cautious with that, and it's a constant learning process, a constant process where you're taking in information from your previous results and and trying to apply it in hopes that you can get a better picture in the future. But it's always going to be an inexact science. And that leads me to our evaluation of the top four guys, because we have some differing rankings. Let me know, first off, how did your top four settle out? You've got, I think we both have the same four in that group, but our order is pretty different. So what do you have in that top four?
So my top four, I've got Caleb Williams as the top prospect at quarterback in this class. Then at number two, I've got Jayden Daniels out of LSU. At three, I've got Drake Maye, and then J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan at four. That's how it shakes up right now, and I don't see that really changing because the grades are pretty much complete at this point, and we've dug into about as much tape and other information, data from their athletic profiles and stuff of that nature that we can really sink our teeth into. So now it's kind of time to solidify that board. So that's how I have my top four shaken out.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to finalized too. We've got a couple weeks, but we're getting to that point where you have most of the information. Now you just got to weigh it. I have McCarthy at 4 as well. I was thinking maybe because we've heard that maybe he could be QB 2 or 3 off the board, right? So I was thinking like, hey, what are the separating factors between him and Daniels, my QB 3,
Right.
Jayden Daniels? But the more I think about it, the more I think Jayden Daniels is the rightful. He's a top 3 QB, right? And you have him QB 2. I think that's viable as well. And I think the Commanders, we've heard reports that maybe they like him at 2, right? I think that'll be a great scheme fit. And I do think there's enough on tape to warrant that gap between Daniels and McCarthy. So number 4 is McCarthy for me. Number 3 is Daniels. It's tough because you only want to rake it. I know, and you know what I'm leading up to, but it's 1A, 1B for me at the top. And I've had Drake Maye 1A for a long time. They've gotten even closer somehow. They were already really close. And then on regrading, it got even closer to the point where, I have a size score grade just to score their size and, frame durability, right? Being able to see over the line. We know that it's a little important, right? It's not the most important thing. It's one of the least important things for QBs when you're grading against processing, accuracy, arm talent, athleticism, things like that. But it does matter, right? So the size score, they're close enough that that's the differentiator for me. So they're basically tied on my board. I have a 1A, 1B, Drake Maye, Caleb Williams. It's a tough class to grade, though. It's very tough. All of these guys have varying degrees of upside, varying degrees of operational utility on the front side. And, there's so many different projections, especially for a guy like J.J. McCarthy or Drake Maye, because they are so young and so talented. But yes, some of the volatility that you see with young QBs, it's there as well on the tape. So let's get into the Drake Maye discussion first, because that's where the biggest discrepancy is on our boards. Drake Maye, there's been a lot of discourse around him. I think the most discourse, right? Caleb Williams, more the off the field stuff, but generally every evaluator who watches the tape objectively is in agreement that, yeah, he's one of the best prospects to come out over the past 10 years. He is the quintessential creator, right? But he's also very good on RPO looks. He's got very controlled mechanics on those one read throws. He's a magician off script as well, but he's got good accuracy and mechanical synergy as well. There's a lot to like with him for sure. Enough that's generally a consensus view that he's going to be probably the QB1, and most people have him there. Drake Maye is a little bit more polarizing on that front. There are a select few who have him as QB1. Most people have him as QB2. Some have him as QB3. Usually, once you get to McCarthy, people will acknowledge Maye is probably, a tier above that. But still, there's a little bit more variance there with his profile. And you look at the production, took a slight step down in 2023, was very efficient in 2022, but you saw some of that mechanical work to be done for a young QB. And there were flashes of growth in 2023, but never really sustained it. There were times where he got in a rut and was inaccurate for big stretches. But at the same time, some of the throws that only he can make, right? So Drake Maye is such a polarizing evaluation. And I know I've been making you talk a lot to start here. I'll give my evaluation eventually, but
no, I like it. I like it, man. I know you're a Drake Maye truther, and I see a lot of brilliant in his game, man. There's a reason why he's number 3, and it's in this class. That's saying something.
Yeah, for sure. It's a strong class. And I think we need to lead off with that. Like, first off, like all 4 of these guys, and you said it earlier, but all 4 of these guys, I think, have optimistic projections. I think you get them in the right spot, they can really do something. But tell me about what you saw with Drake Maye, because I've watched him time and time again. You've watched him a few times as well. Sure. There's a lot to take in with him. There's a lot of information to sift through, a lot of kind of conflicting arguments with him. What did you see on the tape with Drake Maye, and what excites you, what concerns you, and what led you to ranking him below Daniels?
So anybody that has Drake Maye at number 1 overall as the quarterback or best player in this draft, or the top quarterback prospect like yourself, as you even said, it's really close, but it's still you prefer Drake Maye. I see it. like the flashes of excellence is there in pretty much every box you want to check. Like there are times where he throws with anticipation, which is a huge thing for me because in the NFL, you're not going to be able to throw to wide open receivers all the time. In fact, there's a huge difference between, as you well know, college open and NFL open. That margin shrinks drastically. And Drake Maye flashes ability to work over the middle of the field with anticipation on in-cutting routes that I really like. And I value that skill set heavily heading into the NFL. When his mechanics stay intact, Ian, that's where I see a potential all-pro.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I see the ceiling comparable to that of like Justin Herbert. Like I see those physical traits. I see that physical profile. I see the arm talent. Like there's moments where you watch Drake Maye, and by the way, one of the things that I don't want to hold against him is how terrible the offensive line was for North Carolina in 2020.
And that's a tough real quick. That's a tough dichotomy to address because at the same time, you don't want to make excuses for a guy either, right? Like that's kind of the biggest thing. Like how do you work in context in an evaluation, right? And the same can be said for other guys too. Like Caleb Williams was constantly having to dig his team back from 50-point deficits, it felt like, with that defense, right? And his offensive line wasn't great either. So it's like, yeah, how do you factor that in? But you do have to acknowledge it. And the acknowledgement with Drake Maye is that the supporting cast he was working with never was great. And sometimes that did exacerbate some of the mechanical issues that you see.
Yeah, Josh Downs was a nice prospect. Devontae Walker is probably a late day 2 aggressively, probably a day 3 prospect at wide receiver. But I wouldn't, some of the other weapons that the top prospects in this class, I think Drake Maye was working with the least of all of these other quarterback prospects. And look, no matter you want to go, folks are going to say, well, I have concerns about how he operates under pressure. Well, he was under pressure all the time. There's 4-man fronts and there'd be a free runner coming through the B gap. How are you supposed to be able to play quarterback when that is a regular occurrence for someone like Drake Maye? But some of the things that concern me too about Drake Maye, which is why I knock him down to number 3, is the inconsistencies with his mechanics. I see a lot, oftentimes when it's, you understand that concepts and playing on time is immensely important at the quarterback position. And that's what I think is something that translates very favorably to the NFL. Someone like Brock Purdy, who doesn't have the physical skill set, but you see him at the apex of his drop, the ball is generally out of his hands. And you see the eyes, controlled eyes, disciplined eyes, being able to use eye manipulation, which Drake Maye flashes. He flashes playing on time when his mechanics stay in place. The things that concern me are his moments where he's inconsistent with his footwork. Sometimes he'll skip steps, like in a 3-step or a 5-step drop, and he kind of prefers this hop back where he gets real toesy, where he's bouncing up and down. If you watch his tape, you'll kind of see his jersey number jump up and down, which that leads to some of his his accuracy inconsistencies that are kind of puzzling, because in particular, pushing the ball down the field while he flashes immense arm talent and really nice ball placement on vertical concepts, there's times where he sprays it all over the field, in particular trying to work outside the numbers that just make you scratch your head because you see him operate at such a high level. But also he has a weird tendency, and I don't know if you saw this on tape, if he knows where he's going or he has a primary read that he's trying to work, whether it's to the boundary or to the field side, he'll kind of drift, unnecessarily drift in his drop back towards that intended target, which just brings him into congestion with his right or left tackle and makes the throw a bit more difficult than it needs to be. Now, I think I forget which game it was, where pretty much he did that on a vertical throw down the right sideline, and he kind of drifted and off his line and misfired. But then later in the game, they went right back to it. He drops back and drops a dime 30 or 40 yards down the football field. I hate that I can't remember which game it was off the top of my head, but seeing that on tape, the flashes are there, but the inconsistencies as far as his footwork and playing on time, there are some weird hesitations and turn downs that I don't like. And I also saw some moments, Ian, where he saw ghosts. Like he would kind of get a little skittish in the pocket and kind of turn down guys screaming open down the football field and tuck it a little bit prematurely. Now, I'm not trying to say that that means he's going to be a bust or that's what he's going to do in the NFL, but the fact that you saw it makes it go the range of outcomes is a little bit nerve wracking for me when it comes to Drake May. But the physical talent and the flashes of, you know, immense arm talent, throwing with anticipation. You know, and he's a plus level athlete too. You know, I understand that he maybe is not as dynamic as, you know, Jayden Daniels or Caleb Williams as a runner, but make no mistake about it, this man can absolutely do some damage with his legs, and he's a great prospect. I just have some concerns about his consistency with his footwork, his accuracy, and being able to navigate the pocket consistently. He's flashed all of what I want to see to warrant a top 5 pick. I just have some concerns.
Yeah, and I love it. You brought up like so many things that I wanted to expand on. I'm glad you did because I think, you know, first off, that point about playing in rhythm and on time is so correct, and it's such a big thing in the modern NFL. And that's one reason that we talk about J.J. McCarthy, and you hear people saying like, "Oh, he's a great fit for a Shanahan or McVay offense." Why is that? Because those offenses are predicated on timing and synergy and cohesion within the offense, right? And it's kind of redundant to say now because it feels like half of the NFL is a Shanahan or McVay offense at this point, right? So it's one of those things where, you know, hey, like, is he a fit for that? He's just a fit in general because he can play in rhythm, you know, and there are other issues with McCarthy that we'll get to in a little bit. But I think one of the things I do think mechanically he is a little bit cleaner than May. I think his energy circuit from his lower body to his upper body is a little bit cleaner. I think he's got a really crisp release. He's shown that he can work 3-step drops and not put any fat on that drop back. The base width is more consistent. There are times where he'll elongate on his release, which can tug his upper body a little bit off kilter. But to your point, I do think it's a little more prevalent on May's tape. And with May, I think the biggest thing, two things, you mentioned it being toesy, right? A little too tall with his mechanics, which that was one thing that I noted in 2022. Didn't quite get rid of that in 2023. And I also think his base width can be inconsistent. Now, what does that do when his base width is inconsistent on release? Can impact his ability to drive and roll his base forward and get that hip torque on throws. I think he's very good at getting that hip torque, but channeling it properly and maintaining that synergy and level shoulders is the issue. Because when your base is a little too thin, that can either tug your front shoulder up and he can release with that, and that causes him to sail throws over his targets, or your release, the jerk of your release can tug your front shoulder down as you go through, and then that could cause throws to go in the dirt, right? So there's a lot of volatility and variance that comes with that inconsistent base width. That's what anchors your mechanics as a quarterback, and that's what's so inconsistent with May. And I definitely see the concerns there. I see why that's an issue, because if you can make the right read, you can navigate the pocket the right way, but if you can't hone in and kind of wrangle in your mechanics and stay mechanically sound on release, that's going to impact the result no matter what. So I definitely see the issues with that. And that's something that has concerned me a little bit. And going back and watching the tape, that's why him and Williams have gotten even closer for me, because I look at that and I say, yeah, there's going to be some work to do. But Derek, it's tough, man. It's really tough because I watch Georgia Tech, right? I watch Duke. I think the Duke game from 2023 is a really good microcosm of May as a quarterback prospect, because early on in that game, right, he was not in a rhythm, and you could tell all the issues that we just mentioned. He was showing all those on a down-to-down basis, missing guys high, missing some guys low, drifting into pressure a little bit, which I think all these things are peppered on tape. I'm not too concerned about the pocket navigation. I think in general, he is good there. I think you see him slide away from pressure. I think he's really good at navigating the pocket, sliding away while keeping his eyes upfield. And there are times where he'll slide to maintain leverage with his anticipated target, right? You know, so some of those can cause him to drift into pressure, but more often than not, I think he is generally good at that. I think, you know, rolling out a little too early sometimes is something that happens, but that to me isn't quite as prevalent as the mechanical issues. I think the mechanics is probably the biggest thing you're working with there. But the Duke game, right? So early on, he was all over the place mechanically, accuracy wise, right? But he started to get into a rhythm down the line, and there were some really good flashes early on. Like even when he was off his game, his athleticism, man. Like I think I underrated it in my initial viewing of him. I don't think the gap is as big between him and Williams as I thought, right? I think Williams is better at change of direction, naturally being a little smaller,
Right.
but Drake Maye is very explosive. He's got great open field speed. He hurdled a guy, cleared him in that game as well.
Yeah.
So, like, dude, this dude is an insane athlete. Like, this is a legit Josh Allen level runner, right? But he's got great change of direction for his size, too. You watch him sidestep rushers in the pocket, flow out into the flats. He can throw off platform, too. There was a really impressive throw, and it was also a really impressive show of situational awareness early on in that Duke game, where the Duke defense, they had some confusion. They had 15 guys on the field. North Carolina hikes the ball. The flag comes out, right? Drake Maye immediately knows he's got a free play. He gets some free pressure to the left. He sidesteps that guy and is rolling to the left across his, against his dominant hand. And he's got a vertical shot. He torques his hips while running left at full speed, corks a laser to where only his guy can hit it on the vertical plane with a defender right in his chest and gets it to that. So it's like throws like that where you can make that kind of play off platform, right? The situational awareness, the leverage IQ as you're throwing to naturally place it where only your receiver can get it. And that's not the only example. Like there are games where when he's dialed in, man, he can hit some insane situational precision throws.
Right.
Later on in the Duke game, when he was in rhythm, he was hitting them left and right. There was a throw again where quick 3-step drop, right? He has pressure up the B gap, right? He steps into the pocket and then flows out, really nice sequencing, and then sees a crossing pattern down the field, getting a step on his guy, throws stepping up, and hits it only where his guy can get it in an incredibly tight window, 50 yards down in the end zone, touchdown. Had another one that was dropped. I think those throws really show you what he can do, because I think the mechanical issues and the accuracy, it's not that he can't do it. When he's in the zone, he can do it. And it's not just that too. Like there were throws I remember against Campbell, right? And you see some of these windows where he's throwing it down the middle of the field, anticipating those middle field windows and giving it to his receiver, where the receiver can work back to the ball to avoid contact threats, safeties closing in, right? That kind of situational precision with that kind of arm is really impressive to me. And I just think for him, it's really a matter of when you're in rhythm and when you're out of rhythm, right? Because when he's in rhythm, you see that window anticipation, you see the DB manipulation too. Back when he was playing South Carolina, there's some really impressive reps. And this is something I saw from CJ Stroud. I don't think Maye does it nearly as consistently, right? That's the big thing for him. But you can see when he sees that single high rotation, he knows he's going to have an opportunity on that crosser, right? So he's got his shoulders pointed right to hold that center field safety, but his feet are already pointed to the left, and he's got the arm elasticity to correct that with his release as well. I think the arm elasticity can work toward correcting incongruent mechanics. That's why you see guys like the modern QB's mold that we see be able to throw off platform and still maintain accuracy, because they have that elasticity and torquing freedom, and that's there with Maye. You definitely need to iron out the mechanical inconsistencies. You need to roll with that. You need to work with that. But when he's in the zone, you see all those things, man. So the more I talk about it, and I've said this a couple times with Maye, early on in the cycle, right? Caleb Williams, to me, there were times when he brought those chaotic situations that he's so good at navigating on himself a little bit, because he would miss open field reads in the short range, right? And I don't think, the more I watch the two, I don't think Maye deserves quite as much credit as I've been giving him for that. I do think there are times when he can do it, but he's pretty streaky as well, right? So the phrase that I've used at times is the better mold of physical talent and operational utility with Maye. But the more I rewatch, I think him and Williams are a little similar in that they both have room to not take the big play and just operate within the offense with consistency, right? I think Williams is a little more mechanically controlled. I think Maye is a little bit better at anticipating windows and processing the field, right? So it's a trade-off, right? And who do you want? That's up to you. But I really think if you can see that through, if you can get him to be a little bit more controlled and consistent mechanically, I think you're looking at a top flight passer and a top flight weapon at QB in the NFL. And so that's what's so enticing to me.
I think the ceiling is higher for Drake Maye than it is for Caleb Williams. And again, that's we're really nitpicking here, because Caleb Williams has a pretty darn high ceiling.
I know. It's like both of these guys, like, hey, let's just preface right here. Like, both these guys can be top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. It's not out of the question. With Maye, the mechanical issues are a little bit more to deal with, so there's maybe a little bit longer of a runway. But at the same time, that upside is there. It is tangible, and in the right situation, you can definitely unearth that.
Oh, it's there. It's certainly there. And you can even kind of start to maybe even point to a little bit as well. That's when you can kind of get into the nuance. of was he rushing through his drops because of the lack of protection in front of him,
Yeah.
right? Like, was he trying to do too much? And the same thing can be said for Caleb Williams, and you kind of touched on it already. But are they trying to do a little bit too much, trying to rush through things, skip through steps, and maybe those are some of those bad habits that on tape, sure, we can sit here and dissect and go, oh, that's a major concern. But once an NFL, coaching staff gets their hands on him, starts working with him, and understands what Drake Maye can do, and sees that, look, he's been able to check every single box that we're looking for on tape. We just have to be able to clean it up. Yeah, Drake Maye has such an exciting profile entering the NFL, and I get why I feel disrespectful putting him at 3. I feel like it could easily come back to bite me in the tail if he comes out and plays to his ceiling, because I do think he has an all-pro type of ceiling entering the NFL. That's how special of a prospect he is. He flashes it. It's there. If we can clean it up, then I'm all about Drake Maye. There's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, and I think his mechanics too. Like, I don't think you're working from the ground floor. I think there are times where he has shown that he can stay in phase while climbing the pocket. I do think that's there. I think when his release is compact, when he keeps it controlled and efficient, he's got a quick release for his size. Some guys have winding releases, and there are times where it gets away from him a little bit. But by and large, I do think you're working with a guy where if he can stay in phase, if he can just stay controlled, you're not working from zero. You have something to build on. So there's a lot to be excited about. But let's talk about the guy who you have at QB2 over Maye, Jayden Daniels. What sold you so much on him? The electric playmaking is definitely there. I think the deep passing ability. I can't remember the exact stat, but I think 20 plus plays, right, on the ground and through the air. I think he was safely the leader in the 2023 college football season, generating those kinds of plays, like maybe 80 plays of 20 plus yards total. And, obviously won the Heisman because of that big play ability. Talk to me about what you saw with Jayden Daniels, because he's been one. And shout out to Dalton again, because in the summer, he was like, I like the Slim Reaper out of LSU. I like this guy. He's competitive. He's athletic. There's upside there. And now we're talking about him as a top 5 pick, probably a top 3 pick, and potentially top 2. So he's definitely seen that upside through. Talk to me about what you saw, what sold you on him, what makes him your QB2.
Well, his development as a passer certainly jumps out to where he was during his days at Arizona State, right? I mean, it almost feels like 2 completely different players. And it feels like the same thing can be said about like Michael Penix Jr. back during his days at Indiana, and how he just exploded when it came to production once he transferred over to Washington, and even Bo Nix, Auburn to Oregon. But Jayden Daniels, his ability to be able to work the football field and actually get to his backside in through full field progressions was something that really, really surprised me. And that certainly showcases an immense amount of development from what I saw during his days at Arizona State. I mean, you can see it within the first carry or two. When he tucks the ball down, dude is dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a plus level athlete, incredibly twitchy. Now, granted, does he take too many hits? Yeah, there's some very, very, very questionable business decisions that he makes when he turns into a ball carrier, which are a little bit concerning, because he does have a little bit of a thinner frame. I know that, his weight was certainly an encouraging sign after not weighing in at the NFL Combine. I believe he weighed in at, 210, if I'm not mistaken, at the LSU Pro Day. Folks were kind of probably a little worried that he was going to come in sub 200 pounds, but north of 200 pounds, I can work with that, given his athleticism and explosiveness when he decides to tuck it and run. But one thing, when you think about it, Ian, one thing that I expected with all of his rushing production in 2023, over 1,000 yards, and in college, sack yards count against you in your rushing totals. So the fact that he was able to get north of the 1K mark just tells you how much of a problem he was for opposing defenses in the SEC to be able to slow him down as a runner. But I didn't see what I expected when turning on his tape. I saw a little bit more discipline than I expected.
Yeah, I think
when it came to hanging in the pocket.
When you see that production, you think, all right, this is maybe a guy who relies on that athleticism to a fault. I don't think that's the case with him, for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that I also kind of like about Jayden Daniels is his ability to kind of keep his feet and his base within the pocket. Like that's one thing that I kind of like now. Is it perfect all the time? No, it's not. And we see Lamar Jackson's really toesy, right? But that's because the man plays on his toes
Mhm.
because at any given second he can turn into a runner
Yeah.
and take it to the house. But when he decides to go ahead and rip a 20-yard in cut, all the cleats are in the ground, and I really saw a lot more touch, being able to feather in leveled throws to work the middle of the football field than I expected. His tape against Florida, Ian, he was dominant.
Mhm.
I dare say, could we find a better game from any quarterback prospect in this class and maybe even some of the previous ones than his performance against Florida in 2023? Like, he was dominant, absolutely dominant. And I know that he was throwing to two potential first round picks on the outside with, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., but his ability to push the football down the field was impressive. And he checks a lot of boxes as far as being able to go through his progressions. Also, there was some deception with his eyes too, kind of being able to find the safety too in like pre and post snap looks. In particular against Florida State, there was one where they had a middle field open pre snap look, and he hit an in cut to the slot receiver. Second level throw, but when they rotated from the backside safety to middle field closed, he understood to be able to make sure that I don't lead him into trouble by pushing the ball too far vertically to get the middle field safety into the play. Maybe enough touch to be able to get it over the second level defender linebackers. And also, since they rotated into a cover three shell, he couldn't just throw it straight down his line, because then the corner who was kind of midlining the two threats on the near the sideline could have gotten involved.
Mhm.
So he feathered the throw in perfectly, and things like that on time too, at the apex of his drop. Just a lot of boxes that checked, and you have that elite level athleticism and the development as a passer, and you see how he's improved in that element of his game. There's just a lot to work with for an NFL team if you get a dynamic athlete like that under center, but also can operate within the confines of an offense. Again, being able to get to that backside end. Ian, we still see Justin Fields having issues consistently getting to that backside end in the NFL. I understand he had a really nice offensive line and had a clean pocket a lot there at LSU in comparison to Drake May, who was, essentially under siege.
Mhm.
It felt like every time he was dropping back, but there's just so much to get excited about with Jayden Daniels. Yeah, he doesn't have the hyper explosive arm. You don't see the elite velocity with the ball shooting out of his hand, but it's strong enough, and his base allows him to get enough torque to push the ball on all three levels of the football field. And his touch is something that I came away very, very impressed with.
Yeah, I think. Well, first off, the athleticism. This dude is the apex of explosiveness, speed, agility. I don't think there's a box he doesn't check aside from the size and not having the mass, right? Which he's so good at evading contact. I don't think that's too big of an issue for him. Yeah, but no, to your point, I think that the growth that he showed as a passer, right, was the most impressive thing for me, because I look at, again, the stats, right, and you look at the frame, and then you watch him in the pocket. Like, this is a dude who was playing at like 205 probably, right? 6'4",
Right.
6'3", 205. Definitely a leaner guy, right? And he's not scared of rushers in the pocket in the slightest. He is one of the most poised passers that I've seen in this class. So I was watching him. I'm like, this poise for a guy this light, like, I would be scared out of my mind, like thinking hey, if I get hit the wrong way, I'm getting injured, right? And to your point, you mentioned earlier, you do want him to have that awareness at times off script, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't jump into this crowd of four defenders, right? Like, maybe I shouldn't do that. But it's not like an issue that causes you to take him off your board in the slightest, right? And I think, the deep passing ability, the leverage IQ, you mentioned it. He was throwing to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., right? Any quarterback is going to have a good time when they're throwing to those guys. But at the same time, there are a lot of boundary, 9 routes, slot fades, where he's placing it to the back shoulder
Yeah.
with perfection, lofting it up there, getting it right in the proper trajectory, the right spot where his guy can make a play and not be crowded by that defender. that kind of situational precision in the deep third is very impressive. And I do think he can go from left to right, scan full field progressions, reset his base. You mentioned it, staying within the pocket. The term I like to use is staying within his cylinder, right? Imagine his cylinder encasing a quarterback, right? He never gets too wide. He's always very confined, very efficient with his mechanics. And that translates in the short range, in the intermediate range, and in the deep third. I think some of the concerns I have, the arm, as you mentioned, I think it's good. I gave him a 7 in arm strength. So
Yeah,
good, right? He scored high enough to get a trait bonus for me, but not nearly in the range of Caleb Williams or Drake May. I think that's the
sure.
biggest thing. And I think J.J. McCarthy's arm is stronger too, right? I don't think
Mm,
Daniels is as elastic either. I don't see quite the amount of angle freedom that I do with other guys. And
agreed.
then I think the pressure to sack ratio is another big one. One of the higher ones in this class, might be one of the highest ones. So he's very athletic. He knows how to evade, but there are times where he goes on autopilot a little bit off script, right? And you want him to correct that. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, that's not a habit that can be corrected. So you worry about that too. But the more I think about his processing, and I gave him a very good score for processing, I think the progression work, I think he can anticipate over the middle. It's a little inconsistent for me for a
It
24-year-old still. But seeing that leverage identification in the deep third and seeing his ability to, as you said, point out mismatches, little spatial modulations that he can manipulate, and knowing how to place it to, according to his receiver leverage, those things are very high level for a guy as athletic as this. I think you look at that big playability in both phases, it's definitely there. So seeing him as your QB2, I understand it completely. I definitely get it because he is so talented on the athleticism side. He has definitely enough arm to work with. And then the processing, I think you're working with a guy who really your only questions is, can he last? Does he have enough
Yeah.
durability, right? Which for all the hits he took, he never had too many bad injuries at the collegiate level. So it's tough to predict. It's tough to project, but I do think you can safely bank on this guy being a solid starter. The only question is Drake May and Caleb Williams have arms that allow them to make throws that even Daniels probably can't make as consistently. Up the seam, those drive throws where you need the velocity to get it to your guy before the DB's keyed in. That's kind of the differentiator with him. So it's a tough decision. It's a tough discussion, but it's fun. We got around 10 minutes here, a little less. Let's get on to J.J. McCarthy, both of our
Yeah.
QB4s. And he's an interesting one because he's been mocked in the top 3 at times as well. We've kind of seen the hype kind of growing for him. QB4 for you. And real quick, too, just so we get this in, how did you sift through that Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler group? Because I've got Penix at QB5, Nix at QB6, and Rattler at QB7. What did you order that real quick? And then we'll get to McCarthy.
I've got Penix at 5. I've got Nix at 6, and then Rattler at 7.
Cool.
Splitting hairs a little bit. I really loved what I saw in 2023 from Michael Penix.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's holes in his game that make me a little bit concerned. I actually really wanted to see him throw with a little bit more anticipation from a guy who produced as many yards through the air as he did over his final 2 years at Washington. But certainly there was a lot to love. I mean, his arm, although it's a weird throwing motion,
Yeah, for sure.
it's got some velocity and the ball shoots out of his hand. One of the bigger things when it comes to Penix is I worry about his effectiveness throwing the football when it's off platform.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem as natural and fluid when he gets moved off his spot. I feel like pressure and congestion in the pocket can have a greater effect on him than some of the other guys at the top of this class.
Yeah, I agree. And he's a little stiff in the hips too. Like a guy like Drake May, 6'4", 225, and he can redirect really freely and channel explosiveness out of those redirections. Michael Penix Jr., we saw his 40-yard dash. I mean, you didn't really need to see that to know, like when he gets in a straight line, he can move for sure. But the hip flexibility isn't there to the level that other guys have it. And that can impact his creation capacity as well. So I like the processing ability with him. I think he can pick out those windows outside the numbers, outside the hashes, right? He's got that field vision to him. Over the middle of the field can be a little less consistent. And that's kind of a thing you see often with guys. In the middle of the field, you've got more components layering together, more coverages layering together. So naturally, it would make sense that when you can isolate a guy one-on-one, it's a lot easier to throw to that leverage. And we see that with May. Like when he isolates guys one-on-one, he's got the drive velocity and he can throw with that situational precision to make make that throw count. But over the middle of the field, it's tougher. It's just tougher. You got more things to balance, and that kind of leads into J.J. McCarthy, Michigan, a guy who is, I think we say the word polarizing a lot with this class. He might be the
Yeah.
most polarizing, which is saying something for sure. He's my QB4. I'll probably stay there. I was reevaluating a little bit, but the more I rewatch, the more I think, hey, yeah, Jayden Daniels is kind of where I want him to be in my top three. I look at J.J. McCarthy, definitely has the upside, right? And
Right.
I think he's a little more athletic than people let on sometimes. Like I go back to 2022 and 2021. 2021 when Cade McNamara was starting, right? And they rotated McCarthy in, and they rotated him specifically for utilizing his athleticism and running ability. So he's explosive, he's agile, he's got enough speed for his size. I don't think that's a problem. We can tick off that box. He's got a really elastic arm, really loose throwing motion.
Very.
I like that part of his game a lot. And then we mentioned earlier the mechanical synergy, the energy channeling is what I like to call it, right? From his lower body to his arm, that rotation is almost always in sync. It's almost always uninterrupted. Whereas a guy like Drake Maye, yeah, he gets a little too tall. His base is a little too wide, and that can cause some aberrations with your release. I don't see that quite as often with McCarthy. There are times where he gets a little too wide, but generally he's a very clean prospect who can operate in rhythm, in structure, and then also has the upside on the creation phase. What landed him at 4 for you? That balance of physical talent and operational utility that we always talk about. How does that factor in? And also just the success he had at the collegiate level. We know, for me personally, like that doesn't factor into my score, but we see it every year. NFL evaluators, they're like, oh, this guy's a winner, right? This guy's a leader. And that has to be on the back end of your mind too. So McCarthy, what were your thoughts?
So one thing that you mentioned, I like to call it harmony between your feet, your base, your hips. His mechanics, I really like. I think that's a huge plus of his game, and I love his arm. Like you talk about a guy that I didn't expect to generate that much force, but when you stay consistent and you can kind of generate that hip torque with a strong base and with his just natural arm talent too. I mean, that ball shoots out of his hands, and I feel confident that he can attack all three levels of the football field. Outside the numbers, I don't think arm strength is an issue or a concern for me whatsoever when it comes to J.J. McCarthy. Far better athlete than, yeah, sure, he's maybe not in Jayden Daniels category, but I really think that as far as fluid movement, athlete, open hips, burst acceleration, I think he's right there with Caleb Williams. Maybe he's not quite the off-script creator.
Yeah.
I don't that Caleb Williams is. I also just think that it's unfortunate that we didn't get as many reps to dig into with his role in that Michigan offense,
Yeah.
right? Sure, we see the glimpses. I think he's a very good processor. That ball, we talk about hitting your back foot at the apex of the concept and the drop, and the ball coming out of your hands and being able to throw with anticipation into smaller, tighter windows. I see that over the middle of the football field with J.J. McCarthy. You're just not going to get the overwhelming amount of reps to validate that, checked box as you are with some of the other top prospects because of what he was asked to do in that Michigan offense. I do think that there's something to say too about operating a pro style offense.
Yeah.
If he steps in, if the Minnesota Vikings do make an aggressive move to jump inside the top 10 to draft J.J. McCarthy, do I feel confident that he can have success in Kevin O'Connell's heavy play action system? I do.
Yeah.
So those things, I think his game translates really well to the NFL. Now, we're just not going to have as complete of an evaluation on J.J. McCarthy, which is why I don't, while the flashes are there, I saw more flashes from Drake Maye. So, and again, I think Drake May's ceiling is the highest in the class. So, I'm going to give the edge to someone like Drake Maye, even though the winning intangibles are very nice, right? That was also a pretty darn good roster there at Michigan.
Yeah.
We see two receivers in Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson that, are NFL caliber talents.
Yeah, Johnson gets slept on sometimes. He's legit. And then Roman Wilson is without saying. He's very good.
So, the roster was not bad around J.J. McCarthy whatsoever. I mean, they leaned heavily on Blake Corum, and for good reason. It worked. National championship, tip of the hat. Certainly the flashes are there, but just not. He wasn't asked to do quite as much, and with some of his pitfalls. I'm not going to aggressively put him ahead of Drake Maye or Jayden Daniels on my board.
Yeah, and it's tough because the experience argument gets made a lot, and he had 2 full seasons as a starter, right? Like, let's not act like he has no experience. We're not in an
Right.
Anthony Richardson situation where he had 1 full season. You could tell with more time he was going to be great, and you can tell with McCarthy, like, hey, the light comes on sometimes. There's some really nice anticipation throws over the middle, understanding where the DB's eyes are, and if he gives up that eye discipline, if he turns his back, I'm testing that tight window, right? I love that fearlessness in McCarthy's game that you see sometimes. The field vision is very hot and cold, though. There are times when he sees the window. There are times when he doesn't. There are times when he tries to force it, and he really shouldn't. That first throw in the Alabama game, he was trying to throw it away maybe, but he didn't get it high enough too. Like, there's just little situations where you can tell, yeah, this is still a young quarterback who doesn't quite have the discretion and the detail that we want when he needs to operate, right? And I think off platform, like you mentioned it, he translates very well. He just translates well with his mechanical efficiency, with his ability to operate in rhythm. He can read high to low with his progressions, at least. I think coaches will really love that. And off platform, too, on design boot actions and rollouts, he's a very smooth off platform thrower, too. I think that's going to help him a lot, too. You can scheme him up that play action game, which you mentioned earlier. So, there is a lot to work with McCarthy, and the upside is very distinct. It's just like you talk about the upside of some of the top prospects, not quite at the level of Williams, not quite at the level of Maye. And then you talk about the operational utility with a guy like Daniels, who is a better processor, who is generally more accurate, more mechanically sound, even than McCarthy. McCarthy has very good mechanical feel for his age, but I would argue Daniels is even more efficient, more consistent with his release and his motion than McCarthy is too. And that deep passing ability, that ability to process leverage and speed mismatches in the deep third. McCarthy doesn't hold a candle to Daniels there. We'll just say it, right? So it's there are ways to separate these guys right now. I think McCarthy is safely QB4. I think if any team picks him in that top 3, it's going to come down to what he provides off the field, how he goes through interviews, because we've heard rave reviews from most of these guys. I think all 4 of these guys, honestly. So we know Williams' teammates love him. We know Drake Maye. Got a chance to stand in with Drake Maye at the combine and watch him interview, and he was very down to earth, very charismatic, and you can tell he understands the football side of it too. Jayden Daniels, listening to him talk about how he rebounded from Arizona State. This is a guy who's been through the ups and downs, and he's built himself up too. And then Jim Harbaugh is always very, 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 what's the word I'm looking for? I'm blanking on it right now. I'm a writer. You'd think I know the word, but
Harbaugh wants McCarthy to go
that's true.
number
That's true.
4.
He's trying to. He's
obviously he's going to speak very highly of him. I got you.
Yeah, for sure. But it's like, and you hear that from his teammates too, right? So all 4 of these guys, I don't think there are any off-field things that are gonna dilute their profile, right? And I think Caleb Williams falls under that discussion too, because I know he's very polarizing for having that personality, right? But again, you want to know how he is as a leader, a competitor, a teammate. You never hear anything but good things there. So it's one of those things. If McCarthy is going to win over a team, in the top 3, it's going to be off the field, or because he can operate in rhythm and he has that talent. Because you could argue Drake Maye isn't quite at that level of rhythm passing yet. So that's kind of the big differentiator. Not yet, but can he get there? Yes. All these guys can get there. It's just a matter of picking your flavor, as you said at the very beginning. And it's tough, we'll look back 3 years down the line, and situational factors, landing spot is going to play a role for all of them. But right now, there's a lot we don't know. So all we can do is sift through the tape, make our evaluations, and talk about it like we did here. So I think that's a good place to start to wrap up our QB checkpoint. Any closing thoughts you have for our listeners, Derek, before we head out of here?
No, outside of with Jayden Daniels all the way at number 2, and the one thing that I've had a hard time, maybe, and one point that you brought up, Jayden Daniels had a much longer collegiate career than Drake Maye and Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy.
And that's the big question. Is real quick, like people ask, Drake Maye, J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams, where will they be in 2 years, right? Because Daniels is going to turn 24 in December. All these guys are still 21, on the verge of 22. Is he going to be at or above his level at that point? That's the tricky question. You can't always project for that. So it's definitely an element that goes into it.
It's a legit it's a real question.
Yeah.
And if folks have him a little bit lower on their board because of his age in comparison to the other top prospects in this class, then, quite frankly, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And that's one reason why McCarthy is probably so highly touted too, is he's young, he's talented. As complex as the evaluation process can be, sometimes it's that simple. And in the right landing spot, in the right situation, the upside can be unearthed if they have the incubating factors to support that. So QB evaluation, the lesson here, it's complex. It's always imperfect. That's just how it's going to be. But hey, we did our best to break down the tape for you today with our final QB checkpoint episode on the PFN Scouting podcast. Thank you as always for listening. Next week, we'll have a mailbag, our final mailbag before the draft. Then we'll have our final rankings and we'll go through those the week of April 15th. But in the meantime, thank you all for listening. Peace out. Have a good one.